right, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to Moving Beyond Your Front Doors, Best Practices in Making Multi-Institutional Medical Education Research a Reality. This is a SAEM and Education Research Group sponsored didactic panel. My name is Danielle Miller. I am one of the faculty and medical education researchers in the Department of Emergency Medicine at University of Colorado, Denver, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. And really, the inspiration for this panel was, a year ago, I was a site lead for one of my first multi-institutional medical education research projects, and really, it was a steep learning curve. There were a lot of unanticipated and anticipated barriers, and at the time, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have like a panel of experts that I could just barrage with questions and really pick their brains about how to conduct this research and some of the best practices. So here we are a year later in New Orleans, and I've trapped 5 panelists here to answer all of my questions, and really we'll have a great conversation on sort of these best practices. But, in all seriousness, we know that multi-institutional medical education research is incredibly important in increasing generalizability of health science education interventions and findings. Moreover, as this field of medical education research has matured, our scholars, our reviewers, our editors really do expect rigor in the methodology of education research with similarity to things like health science and clinical research. And as it stands, multi-institutional medical education research in emergency medicine is quite limited and provides sort of a barrier to researchers feeling supported in doing this form of research. And I think lastly, as we've moved towards a competency-based medical education framework, it really is essential that we ensure that our educational interventions and outcomes are standardized and truly they're standardized across all the other existing sites. So this panel discussion is meant to foster these discussions in best practices and guidance in conducting multi-institutional medical education research. So these are our learning objectives, and I think we'll begin with introducing our panel today. So I think panel members, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. Please tell us your name, your titles, what institution you're from, and then what lens are you viewing this multi-institutional research through, such as I'm a researcher, I am a journal editor, I am an IRB chair, maybe you're all 3. So we'll start with Dr. Criteria.
I think being all 3 would be very hard. Okay, so Holly Criteria. I'm currently the Associate Residency Program Director and the Competency-Based Education Implementation Lead for the Stanford School of Medicine. What were the other questions?
And then what lens? What lens are you?
Lens?
Yeah.
So I am a researcher and also on the editorial board at AEM-ENT. My research is all multi-institution, so I can talk about all of the pearls and the pitfalls. I have a couple of grants that a lot of these lovely people are involved with as my partners in crime, and have kind of gone through the rigmarole of dealing with all of the red tape and whatnot that goes with doing multi-institutional research.
Hi, everybody. I'm Icjme Jordan. I'm one of the associate program directors at UCLA and also the director of our Discovery Year, which is our scholarly year in the med school curriculum. And then my, research aspects. I am a researcher. I am also, like many of these folks, a decision editor at AEM-ENT. I'm also an associate decision editor for the Icjme Educational Supplement and a reviewer for multiple journals.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Gottlieb. I'm the Ultrasound Division Director and the Fellowship Director at Rush in Chicago. And I'm approaching this from the lens of a researcher who's done both medical education and non-medical education multi-center trials as an editor for 6 journals, including AEM-ENT and Academic Medicine.
I'm Mary McClayton. I'm an assistant program director at St. John's Riverside Hospital in Yonkers, New York. And I'm approaching this from the lens of being a researcher for a fair-sized multi-institution collaboration for medical education research and IRB chair at our institution.
I'm Lainey Yaris. I'm the Vice Chair for Faculty Development at Oregon Health and Science University, and approaching this through the lens of an education researcher, an editor. I'm an editor for AEM, ENT, and deputy editor for Journal of Graduate Medical Education, and then also as the co-author of a couple of policy documents for education research consortiums, including eMERGE and MPERC, Emergency Medicine Health Professions Education Research Consortium, which is the consortium affiliated with Armed Med Ed. I serve as the co-director for Armed Med Ed as well.
All right, we have no financial disclosures. So we'll really run through a set of questions that I have here. If you want to type your own questions, save them towards the end. We will definitely have time at the end for the audience members to ask these experts their questions. So I think, the most natural question to start with is, how did you get started? How do you get started in one of these multi-institutional medical education research projects? How have you all identified sources of collaboration?
It helps to make friends, and I will say I've made friends in a lot of different ways, sometimes here at conferences, sometimes in faculty development programs, sometimes on committee work. I think honestly you just start talking to people and you find that you share similar interests and you're like, hey, let's do this together, and that's sort of how it happened for me.
I mean, I totally agree. I think a lot of things happen fairly organically once you have shared interests. So, for example, you may join research collaboratives. So I'm a member of the International CBME Collaborators, so I do a lot of competency-based education work, and all of us have a shared interest and do research together. As far as leading multi-institutional trials, I totally agree with Jamie. It's you call your friends, and then they call their friends, and you kind of leverage the connections you've made, because you're like, I have this harebrained idea, like, is this something you'd want to do with me? And a lot of times they'll say yes. It also helps to have like a good track record where you did residency, fellowship, where you're faculty, where you've been faculty previously, to leverage those connections. That's why Lainey's probably done, I think, every single one of my projects with me. But I think it's really finding ways to make connections. If you talk to people like big researchers in the field, like I've asked Chris Watling this question, and he's like, I went to the Harvard Macy course this one time because I thought education research was interesting, but I'd never done it before. I made like 2 friends, and then I joined like the research arm at my institution, and then I made more friends. Like it balloons from something really small. It's not like you have to have like 14 institutions that you can call on when you start. And I think that's why people look at this and they're like, that's really daunting.
I completely agree with those pieces of it. You find out your network will often happen organically and you start to seek these pieces out. I think ultimately when you're doing multi-institutional research, it's what's the goal of having more institutions? Like, what, are you just pulling more because you want more volume, just more sites? Or is there a targeted search of, I need a program that will represent from I want a county program, I want Ivory Tower academic program, I want a community program, I want one from each region of the United States. As you start to do that, then it becomes a little bit less of who your friends are, and sometimes it's who your friends' friends are. And who knows someone that'd be a great fit for that. So oftentimes these networks kind of expand from there, because you may not have a contact at the program you need, but I bet one of your friends does.
One thing that I have tried to do, and it's hard sometimes, is I try to pay attention to the listserv emails, and this can be really tiring because we get maybe you can get up to 100 a week from SAEM, CORD, ASAP, AAEM, but if you really, really pay attention, sometimes you'll read about an upcoming project that you really, really are interested in and reply to them. You don't have to have the top-notch credentials and everything just to collaborate on a multi-institutional med ed research project. So that's one thing I like doing.
Yeah, and I think even SAEM has, this is Educational Research Interest Group sponsored, and that's the one listserv I pay attention to because I can't pay attention to all of them, as Dr. McLean can't, but I think if you want to get started, that might be a good entry point too. This is a resource. Excellent. All right, so now you've found your collaborators and decided to start. I guess the next question is really, how do you involve key stakeholders when conducting this multi-institutional research? And additionally, what are sort of unexpected stakeholders or barriers you've experienced at this stage?
I think that when you start the study, it's important to kind of think broadly about who your stakeholders will be. And so your first stakeholders are the sites. And like Mike alluded to, like thinking about what you need in order to put together the perfect team, thinking in terms of how you want to sample your subjects and whether it's a geographic distribution or getting a sample of learners that's representative of the national pool, thinking about areas where you have need in terms of statistical expertise or mentorship or funding. Perhaps you need somebody who's like a really experienced writer and kind of reaching out to sites to fill and complete your team. Thinking about who has connections in their institution so you can get institutional support for some of these studies that you're doing that may require UME support or GME support. And then thinking about the potential audience for your study when you go to disseminate it, and how can I pull together resources that will allow me to build a study that's going to be most relevant to that audience. So I'll just touch upon that and let others address the kind of the barriers.
So I think, the big things when you're trying to get people really invested, and this is all going to sound maybe a little manipulative. I mean, I think it's one of those things where you're like, if I want to do a multi-institutional study and you really want people to buy in, you can like say, I want to apply for a grant, because once you're all like, we're going to apply for this grant, and if we don't get it, I still want to do the study, all of a sudden everybody's on board, and you're like, oh, we're going to do this thing. And we applied for this grant, we didn't get the grant, but we're still going to do this thing because we formed this collaborative and now we're invested, right? So I think that's one way to go about doing it. Other ways are really to get people to have ownership over parts of a project or parts of a study, offer authorship, offer credit in some way, shape, or form, offer just ways for people to get involved and invested in things that they care about. So, if you look at, and I give this example, like it is a multi-year, multi-project grant, like this AMA grant that we're working on. Basically, there's so many different moving parts that everyone on the core team really has part of it that they own. I can't do everything, I can't write everything, I can't be an army. Like we have a small army for a reason and so many sites for a reason. And everyone has different areas of expertise. Like that's why we put this team together the way we did. And if you think about it and you bill it that way up front as, this is why we're doing the things that we're doing and why we're doing them the way that we're doing it, I think that gets everybody really invested and on board with the parts that they're going to own. And I think it's all about ownership and then subsequently accountability. That being said, like there are institutional nuances and things that you have to overcome in order to accomplish some of those things. Like when we'll cover this probably under IRB stuff, but like when you put in IRBs and have data use agreements and all the sharing and whatnot of the things that you're going to be doing.
Well, that was a perfect transition, Holly, because I think now we are going to talk about those nuances of the IRB. So you have your collaborators, you figured out your key stakeholders and had them buy in. There are, when you're doing multi-institutional research, there has to be IRBs and there's nuances at institutions. So what are some of the pearls you have about navigating the IRB?
I pass along to our IRB chair.
So the really great thing about med-ed research in the eyes of the, from IRB perspective is really that a lot of it ends up being exempt. If you look at the Code of Federal Regulations, the 45 CFR 46, they list out all the different exemptions, and quite a lot of them actually do apply to the types of med-ed research projects that tend to get published. So, any med-ed research where you're doing a pretty benign intervention where you were going to collect data anyway to assess the effectiveness of the intervention, or perceptions of how it went for your learners, usually that's going to be exempt, especially if you can guarantee that it's going to be voluntary and anonymous. And there are ways to protect anonymity, like coming up with codes if you want to pair surveys, like a before and an after the intervention type of survey. There are ways to make it voluntary, anonymous, and then you can also kind of back yourself up and cover yourself by having them still do informed consent to participate in the actual research project. So there's that. That's the really good news. The other really good news is that as long as you have received an exemption at the primary site, or as long as there's been an expedited review at the primary site, as long as you get that done really early, and as long as your IRB has the proper credentials so that it's kind of a vetted IRB in the eyes of everyone else. So if you have your national registration, your federal-wide assurance, and everything, then all the institutions that you want to collaborate with can kind of know that they can trust your institutional review board, because not all of them are created equal. Beyond that, the best advice that I could give is just to make sure, number one, that you get your exemption or approval very early on in the process, before you start recruiting your collaborating institutions. That's probably the very best time that you possibly can. And then be sure to disclose to your collaborating institutions and your leaders at the secondary sites exactly what's going to go into the IRB process at their institution. Sometimes it's just a matter of them checking in with their IRB and getting a waiver. Sometimes it's a matter of getting an exemption, which can be pretty quick depending on the IRB processes. And then sometimes it can be a little bit more involved if it needs to go for full review, or expedited review is not quite as bad. So I think those are the biggest ones. Be very clear up front with how much work you think is going to go into it with their IRB. It requires a little bit of speculation, because, like I said, not every IRB is created equally, and they tend to have really varied levels of strictness when it comes to human subjects protections and other aspects of studies as well that are even outside of human subjects protections. Some IRBs are very stringent about study quality and other things that go into studies that aren't actually related to human subjects protections. So.
I have a very strange IRB. Danielle can attest that the Stanford IRB is special. And so I totally agree with everything that's been said. Sometimes your IRB has no idea what you actually do. And so what you will have to do is educate your IRB about what education research is, how it works. Particularly for me as a qualitative researcher, it's been a lot of they ask what is the data you're going to collect? How are you going to do that? What is this? I'm like, this is a grounded theory study. I'm going to ask these initial questions. I will get back to you if you require me to for how this evolves, but a lot of the things that you're asking me for, I don't know yet, because that's part of the study. And so a lot of times it's really having that back and forth of saying, there are certain things about what I'm doing that are different than a lot of the things that you're used to. I will say I've probably bamboozled the Stanford IRB, or just browbeaten them so much to this point where they're just like, we have no idea what you do, it seems fine. So just over-educate your IRB then. And then the other thing is when you're doing multi-institutional research, every so once in a while the other IRBs will look at your IRB and be like, you don't know what you're doing, even though you have all of that magical accreditation, because that's what they do to Stanford. They're like, we don't understand, you clearly have no idea. And so you have to leave a little bit of room for your other sites perhaps to have things approved. like formally approved or formally exempted, which we've had to do. And I think a lot of that comes from, we put things through as like multi-project protocols, again, with like, hey, we don't know what we don't know yet, I'll update these things. And so having that back and forth with your IRB and having them have that conversation with other sites, or you having that conversation with other sites, to help make the lives of the people who are doing the work with you at other places is really helpful, and just the kind thing to do.
I'm just going to add one more thing, adding on to what Dr. McLean said earlier, is as much you can set up the other sites for success, the better, but then you got to follow up with them. So I will send them a copy of our IRB, and I'm like, copy, paste, steal like an artist, take everything from here. Just reduce the amount of work you have to do. I've been a part of a lot of multi-site studies, and more recently, this actually came up for the first time, which was we had this bunch of different sites, and some of them, their IRB asked for some modifications. So they made a modification, but they never told the central site, and the IRBs began to differ. And so you got to check in with them, because their IRBs may have different questions, different adjustments than we do, and if you're not checking with them, there's a risk you can actually have disparate IRBs, and then you have to reconsent people, and that's really painful. So just check in with them, make sure that the final version of their consents, their final version of their study protocols match with yours, because the IRBs sometimes over-edit.
And have any of you ever successfully used like a smart IRB? I was asked to do that recently, and it sounds like, essentially they just defer to the host, like primary institution. I'm just curious because it was the first time I've ever been asked that. So, no?
I really want that.
Yeah.
So there are certain IRBs that have developed relationships where you can share them across there, and once you've done it with one, they just agree that they're all on the same page. There's also sometimes something that comes up from time to time, something called being IRB of record. I've never heard an IRB that's actually ever willing to do that, but the idea is that they would vouch for all the other sites, and they would then be the IRB of record. It seems like that would be really helpful if you're going to do like a 10-year study and you have 8 years lead time. But outside of that, it's a good in theory. I have not found ones that do it, but if you have one that does it, that will make you a highly coveted site.
That's a magical unicorn. Yeah.
It is a magical unicorn.
All right, so now you have your IRB approval suddenly. You did all the best practices with that. So what are now the best practices in standardizing your data collection? And how are you really sharing data across institutions so that it is safe?
All right, I guess I'm going up again. So sharing across institutions, most of the time you're going to require a data use agreement. Not always. One maybe key tenet across all IRB discussions is communicate early and often. Sometimes they will actually say it's fair enough. If it's de-identified, they may not actually care. They may say it's fine, you don't have to go through DUA. Sometimes they do have you go through a DUA, and there's degrees of that. But a DUA or a data use agreement, it takes time. It just takes time. I've had some data use agreements that are approaching 9 months now from the time we started it. They're because it's taking a overtaxed small group of lawyers and the overtaxed group of IRB people and having them all go back and forth through documents, sometimes that they've never seen before, and trying to do it in the best interest of patients. Since data use agreements take a lot of time. Again, a phone call with them saves months sometimes, because when you just explain, oh, this is what I'm collecting, and they're like, oh, that's not worrisome at all. But when they see something, their intention is naturally to protect the patient, protect the learner. But sometimes it's not always it's not always aligned with what ends up being the data you collect. When you just have a conversation, you say, this is why I'm collecting this data. So engage in that early, and that's probably my biggest suggestion for that.
I love that you went with protecting the learner and the patient. My IRB, IRB and DUAs, it's all about protecting IP, Silicon Valley. So I think the better friends, I totally agree, the better friends you can be with your compliance office folks is probably, you're going to be light years ahead. I think I have personally spoken over the phone or over Zoom with every single lawyer now in the compliance office, simply for this reason, because data use agreements should not take a year to go through. But they often do, because if there are things going in there from a language perspective that are not uniform across your institution as like the way they would be worded at a different institution, and they take umbrage with the language, and you have to go back and forth and back and forth. It's much easier just to have that conversation and let the lawyers talk to one another with you there to facilitate. And be like, this is what I actually mean. Can you just put that into whatever words make you happy? I think I've actually said that in a meeting before. I don't care, just figure it out. So I think that is one of the biggest hurdles. The other thing, and this is something I have been schooled on recently, is this difference between data ownership and data governance. Welcome to, I don't know, this whole thing has been very interesting to me. It's who physically owns the data versus this idea of who has oversight over the data. And having those conversations early and often, because a lot of times what we think ownership is actually governance, and vice versa, is really important, and something I had no idea about until I started doing this.
And how are you engaging those lawyers at the beginning? So are you reaching out simultaneously to the IRB and the compliance office? Is it like the IRB says, hey, you're going to need a data use agreement? I'm sure it's different at different sites, but it might be nice to hear some examples.
I wish the IRB would have been like, hey, you're going to need to do this, because I would have done it much sooner. No, for me, it was actually when we set up our ed tech sub-award, and they were like, what is going on with all of this data that you're all going to be sending to this central place that's getting de-identified and sent back to the sites? And I was like, you guys already have a relationship with this group through a different department. And they're like, yeah, they don't have a DUA. I was like, oh no. So someone will always red flag it. It's much easier if you find the people early on your own. And I think this will be my shameless plug for everyone having a project manager who has some semblance of institutional knowledge. Amanda didn't at the beginning, but now knows all the ins and outs of the entire research management group and the compliance office, and will connect me early and often with people who I'm going to need to talk to, and then hound them, because they're completely overtaxed, and making sure things are followed up is really important. And it's institution dependent, but there are like a million people. Finding the right one is really, really hard. So having some help in tracking that person down, or having someone in your department who has a really good relationship with that office, is very, very helpful.
Great. All right, so moving forward, you've gotten your data use agreement in order. What tips and strategies do you have for effective project management within these multi-institutional projects?
So I think with any project, it all comes back to just timelines and setting expectations. Even if it's a group we worked with before, making sure everyone's on the same page. Particularly with newer groups, or when there's people that you haven't worked with before, we get so used to a bunch of emails and email conversations, but the phone call, the quick pickup, let's just talk it through real quickly, get everyone on the same page, align it, is really helpful. And when you are working on a big project like that, that simple kind of Zoom meeting, or in person if you're all at the same conference, it is so important for galvanizing everyone, for kind of building that team together, that it is almost irreplaceable for things that are like big projects like that. Existing teams are different, but like new teams like that. So I think that part's really important. Making sure everyone's on the same page, frequent check-ins, and if someone kind of falls off the grid, talk to them. You can send maybe one, max 2 email nudges, but get on a quick phone call and figure out what's going on and why. Like if their site hasn't gone through IRB, if they're not rolling, sometimes the person may just be overtaxed, and they may have someone on their site that could co-investigate with them, could take over their role. Maybe they just need a mentor to guide them through the process, but they feel uncomfortable saying that over an email chain. I would. There's often factors we don't think about. Maybe it's a life event. There's something going on. But if you don't talk to them, we don't know, and then that portion of the project stalls. So I highly recommend checking in. If you haven't heard anything back from email, a phone call is worth so much more than 25 emails.
I literally take a note from like the project management handbook and make a project plan with a work breakdown structure that tells me all the little pieces that I'm going to need to get done and that all the institutions are going to need to get done right from the beginning with estimated timelines. And I literally map that out in lots of pretty colors on a big, beautiful Excel spreadsheet, and I gray them all out. I know it's crazy. And I grade them all out as I go, but that helps me sort of keep in mind what needs to be done and when, and I can then communicate that to the rest of the group.
I love what you're saying about that, and I end up having like multiple spreadsheets that are exactly like what you're mentioning, and they have like little different colors on the tabs on the bottom and everything. I make these public amongst the entire group, and then you can actually like, I mean, it's really nifty, the new Google functions. If you happen to use Google Drive, you can assign items to specific people if you've talked. I mean, don't just like go making assignments without telling them that they're going to have it in their inbox pretty soon. But that is, you know, the way that I see it, that if you're using those kind of public documents as a way to make assignments and keep everybody on the same page, then you're really, you're developing a system of accountability where there isn't a whole lot of, you know, it's not like you're not giving any like straight negative reinforcement if people don't get don't meet the deadlines or don't get their task done or anything like that. But it is kind of a, you know, it is public knowledge if somebody wanted to go look for it, that, you know, so it just like, I feel like it's a pretty benign way to keep people accountable. But then I also couple that with just like the frequent email communications, and I try to give credit when there are successes of members within the project, like somebody, you know, completed the medical education intervention that we're striving to implement for our learners, and they already have all of their surveys back. They have 100% response rate. I mean, I definitely like to give out those kudos wherever they're due. Now, I mean, you have to also balance this with email fatigue and sending too many of them, because if you start emailing them every 3 days or so and you send out like giant group emails, people are going to start getting really tired of you. So I try to do I set an interval between the emails that I'm going to send. I make them not like super long, drawn out, painful emails. I try to maximize the amount that I'm saying with the smallest amount of text that I can put on that email. And then I can, you know, you can put in a little like TLDR version of it at the bottom, just with the very most important points of your email. And then in addition to that, you can also have, you know, Zoom check-ins with everybody, and I try to find ways to make that, you know, if somebody can't make a group Zoom meeting for your project, I mean, it's not the end of the world. People have things that come up, but I do keep attendance at those Zoom check-ins, just so, you know, and you can send it out with the minutes and everything, just so everybody kind of knows and again, is held accountable, so.
All right, excellent. So our next question is, oh no, we forgot about author order, which is how it happens quite frequently when I'm doing it. So how do you guys approach author order, and when do you have those conversations?
I think it's the first conversation that we have, and usually in the first meeting, either somebody has already self-identified as it's their thing and they're going to be first author, or we have the conversation and say, basically, okay, who wants to do the most work and get the most credit? And then who wants to do the second most amount of work and partner with that person who's doing the most amount of work and then get the senior author position. So we kind of like lay that out, who the two people are going to be, who are going to be like primarily having the responsibility for moving the project forward. And then we usually use the Icjme Criteria, which just kind of lay out the different ways that you can contribute to a manuscript and distribute them in advance and ask people to keep track of their contributions on their own table. And then and make it clear at the end, we'll determine author order based on contributions as you have measured on this, and we all kind of know who has done what. And so people turn those in, and the senior or the first author determines what the author order is. So oftentimes also there's these projects that have multiple different steps. So there can be a pre-plan of, okay, we'll do this project, and this project, and then we'll each have an opportunity to be first, last author, unless you want to opt out of that and you just want to be like a middle author worker bee. And so I think having them up front and giving everybody the opportunity to take the credit, especially have their work rewarded, seems to work well.
And then having an out for people. I think like life happens, and people often just feel weird, bizarre, guilty, etc. for having to say like, I don't have the bandwidth to do what I said I was going to do because like life has happened. So I usually like up front will say like, if shit hits the fan, like what are you going to do? They'll make sure you feel like you can come to me, come to somebody on the team and say, I need to take a step away. Maybe that changes authorship order, but we all have to have each other's backs and have the ability to kind of say, there are certain things that need to happen by certain time points in order to be accountable to the group. But you have to be able to say, this is a safe space if you need to kind of, perhaps relinquish your role on this project and maybe take the lead on the next one.
One thing that I've learned in one of our larger multi-institution collaborations is, there's the question of if you have enough collaborators that are expecting authorship, what do you do if you have like more than 20? And a lot of these journals have, they understandably have cutoffs. I think Icjme has a 12 author cutoff or something. And maybe it's not a hard cutoff, but you do have to start thinking about what is a reasonable number to include on your author byline, and breaking it up into multiple studies, and maybe having some abstracts submitted to the different conferences is a way to ameliorate that. But another thing to consider is consortium authorship, and this is something that I got really into in the past couple of years. So there is a way that you can do it where you create a team name and you list that team name as one of the authors on your author byline. And if you go to PubMed and you click on that team name, then there's a little pull down and it'll actually like list out all of the consortium members. So you could feasibly have 50 consortium members that end up having some something like PubMed credit on their CV. So somebody could look up their name on PubMed and the study would come up. So I think that's another thing to consider. Definitely I echo exactly what was said about the talking about it really early. I've also found, I know that as soon as you get past like the first and second author and then the senior author spot at the end, then you kind of start wondering what goes in the middle there. And I think there are lots of different ways to handle that. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. One way that I really like doing it is I like to try and prioritize the first 6 author positions if you have a really big group of people, because a lot of the citation methods will have you list out 6 authors and then et al. So then if you get cited in somebody else's paper, they'll see your name there. And then beyond those 6, I do it alphabetically. Just so, because it doesn't really matter how many contributions there were quite as much beyond that point. And you also don't really want somebody to be at the very end right before the senior author. I mean, like after a certain point, it just starts to seem a little bit punitive if they're just like, like right before the senior author and their last name doesn't happen to start with a Z. People start like, well, why are they there? And so I would just rather do it alphabetically after about the 6th position. That way you can reward the people who contributed the most without really punishing anybody who kind of like didn't have quite as much time to devote to the project.
Great. And so I know everyone's favorite topic, what are the sources of funding? These projects often are large. And so where have you found sources? When you don't receive funding, how do you proceed?
So there are a remarkable number of grants that we're not aware of and that we often don't think about. It was obviously the big national ones we always hear about, and being at SAEM we hear about NIH and PCORI, and we hear about, you know, the big grants. There's the regional ones like what SAEM has, and what, you know, AAMC has regional. There's all sorts of regional type or societal grants, more specifically, than the societal regional ones. At our institutions, there's way more grants than we think about. If you look at your Department of Philanthropy, I bet there's grants there that we probably not heard about, that are just sitting there and often are prime opportunities for us to think about. Within that realm, too, sometimes thinking outside the box. So if it's something with education that is across specialties, then you can take advantage of one from another specialty, and we're linking into that. And if there's ever a field that crosses specialties, it's literally EM. We are the best cross-specialty people because we kind of touch on everything. So I think thinking through that aspect of things, trying to be aware of the broad range of grant funding, but sometimes it's just not possible. I think it's coming up with creative ways of doing things that are not grant funded. You know, I know that in my department right now, I will not get extra funding for research, like from the department level. If I don't have grant funding, it's unfunded. And so, and that's probably not unique. I suspect many of you kind of empathize with that. If it's not funded, then figure out how to do it. And we have to be creative. Sometimes it's a matter of, you know, identifying things like site champions, right? Figuring out, for example, if I want to do a study amongst, you know, we're a 3-year residency program, I want to get really good recruitment from each class. Maybe I'll have a PGY1, PGY2, and PGY3 author who's involved in this, who will be a site champion to help get that social capital in a way that can galvanize the whole class to actually do the recruitment on that, to be more engaged. Because they're like, oh, it's one of our residents. Like, I want to do the, you know, that. They'll probably do it for me, but maybe not. They're busy, but they'll do it for like their other classmates. Like, oh man, I really want them to succeed. And so you can capitalize on that as a way to like basically increase the number of recruitment for that. Think about creative ways that you can, you know, capitalize on these pieces of it. Medical students who are interested in getting involved with research, caveat, I'm not in any way suggesting that we use them to just replace RAs. You involve in the process, you teach in the process, they learn, they're an active part of the team. But if you do that, you have someone that may have different availability and can enroll people as long as you treat them like a colleague and you actually involve them in the project properly.
I'll say the other trick that I've done, because I have never been successful in securing outside funding for research, is just going to your leadership, whether it's your department chair or maybe a dean at your medical school, depending on the nature of your project, and really trying to justify why this work is important and why it's worthwhile. And they will oftentimes, at least I found in my experience, you know, be able to give you some resources, whether it's access to statistical expertise or transcription or buy down for your time or whatever it may be. Sometimes those things are available and you just have to ask.
All right, great. Last question. You know, this seems like a lot of work. There are many journal editors on this panel. So I guess from your perspective, you know, why are we putting in this extra effort to make this multi-institutional? When you're reviewing these projects, you know, what are you seeing with the movement in med ed?
Generalizability. I mean, that's the big word, right? Like, everyone will come back and be like, you didn't talk about generalizability and your limitations, like, you missed something. And I think, you know, if you are trying to do something that is broadly applicable across our specialty, across multiple specialties, this is, I mean, it feels misappropriated, but representation matters. Representation meaning, you know, if you're trying to make this generalizable to emergency medicine, 3-year residency program, 4-year residency program, community, county, academic, different regions, different perspectives on training. If it is something related to clinical practice, exposure to different clinical problems. Like, you come to Stanford, you will never see a sickle cell patient. Like, you need to have representation depending upon what you're trying to study, such that you can say my results are generalizable beyond necessarily, you know, just what we did, and here's why. It is my perspective that if you can justify what you did, you know, tell me as the decision editor why you did the things you did, and there's good rationale behind it, like, that is 95% of the reason I reject papers. It's, you asked this really interesting question and the methods you used didn't align. And the methods aligning can be things like, this isn't generalizable, or you didn't justify what you did such that the results are impactful or they're not representative the way you're saying that they are. So it's really this idea of are you basically taking representation, is your sampling strategy such that you're answering the question in the way that you say that you're answering it, and that your results mean what you're interpreting them to say? That's my 2 cents.
Excellent. Well, I mean, yeah, Dr. Yaris, you chime in, please. We have time.
Yeah, I was going to second that. And I think that in general, you'll receive a lot of, well, let me just say, I personally have received a lot of rejections that have said single site study. Yep. So there are a lot of editors that if it's a single site study, it's just not going to reach above their bar. But I agree with what Holly said, and I want to emphasize that in most cases, doing it at multiple sites is important and good and necessary, and it's totally dependent on the question. And so really taking a step back and saying, what's my question? Is this a question that I can definitively answer within my population at one site? Some questions you can, or are my results going to be limited if I only study it at my site? And that will help guide you. And sometimes you do a single site study as a pilot and then you expand it to a multi-center trial. Sometimes it's not worth it to do the pilot and you should just start with the multi-center and really thinking about that. What's my question? What are the results, and how will they be limited by my population will help guide you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, panelists, for answering these questions. We do have 5 minutes for questions, so if anyone has a question, I know it's a small group, but if you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone and asking your question. I know. I was asked by the recording to make sure we've recorded all of this, so.
So what do you guys think of researchers from smaller institutions that get their IRB approval and they want to work with you, but they've got no funding for themselves and they got no funding for you guys, and you just assign, kind of, how do you just decide whether you're going to take it on?
I was going to say it's all about interest. I do most of my work non-funded, or actually all of my work unfunded. So I think if there's an interesting project out there, and so long as you have the capabilities at your site to do whatever the plan is, and I have the feasibility at mine, then I'm more than willing to collaborate.
Yeah, I agree with that. So my litmus test for whether I'm going to do something, and I learned this when I was a fellow, is if I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning working on it, am I going to be mad? Do I get to work with really cool people that may facilitate future collaborations or that I just really want to work with? And then, is it in my wheelhouse of interest? If the answer is yes to any 2 of those things, I will seriously consider it.
I just want to add that the vast majority of education research is unfunded. So we have some superstars on this panel who have a lot of funding, and it's great to apply for funding, but don't think that just because you don't have funding doesn't mean you can't do important work. It's a very different model than clinical research still. So funding is great, and you can do really great work without it, and the way that you do it is by working together and sharing resources.
Yeah, I think there's like some resources, like Dr. Jordan was saying, like maybe you need sim time, like everyone's doing a sim project, and you might be able to advocate for doing that without the thousands upon thousands of dollars that go into simulation and task trainers and renting those task trainers. But yeah, I think like Holly, some of like Holly's projects, like you need money, and so maybe being upfront with people that like this project has to get money. We're like developing like a dashboard and all this other things, so I think that can, there are certain projects that just do need it, so.
Ed tech is expensive.
Ed tech, yeah.
Otherwise, I think you can do a lot of the things that you do unfunded.
Yeah.
Do you guys find that mining for collaborators on listservs is actually a beneficial mode of getting people involved, or do you really have to use your network and connections and that sort of thing? I mean, I understand that's better for networking and face-to-face and bringing people in that you know, people you've worked with, that sort of thing. But for someone who's starting at the bottom, is that a realistic way to get people involved?
Yes. I love spamming the listservs, and I love it, and because you always get people. I mean, like what I was saying before about trying to really pay attention to those listserv messages that end up in your Gmail box. I mean, the great thing about the listservs, in my perspective, is that there are other people who are keeping their eyes out for those opportunities. And if they email you back and they're persistent and they really seem interested, that to me means more than, like 5 years of somewhat successful research background. I want somebody who's really interested and really committed, and even if they don't know a ton right off the bat, even if they're super early in their career, I love that kind of a person who's going to respond to those email listservs. Now, it does have to be used with some caution, and you have to be able to, you have to be able to, like, you have to know, number one, that it's going to be, there's ways that it can end up in your limitations section if you end up having a manuscript. Like if you're using the ASEP all members listserv, I feel like that is maybe a 65,000 member listserv at this point. And if you're going to be reporting any kind of a response rate, if that's the only listserv you use, and then even if you get like 200 people that reply to you and you enroll all of those different people as collaborators in your project, that's still going to be the worst response rate in the world because it's like, 65,000 members. So you really do have to justify it. But that said, as long as you know that might be a limitation, I really do feel like listservs are a great way to do it. And it's also like, it's a way to reach a very, very diverse group of folks. Now, if you're just using one organizational listserv, then it's maybe a little bit more limited than if you use multiple ones. You could argue that, maybe the people who are on the CORD listservs are a little bit characteristically different than the people who are on the SAEM listserv. So you just have to know that you might be biasing the collaborators that you get a little bit, but this is a little different than the actual, the study subjects that you're eventually going to end up with. The only other thing I would say is that if you are, concerned about, response rates and that kind of thing, then you also have to, you have to assume that a lot of these people on the listservs are double dipping in the organizations, as like probably all of us are, members of multiple different medical societies. So, I mean, that's another limitation in figuring out any kind of a response rate to your listserv emails. So use with caution, but I think it's great. I really think it's great. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add my very first multi-center study that I did as like an education fellow. I got all of my collaborators from the CORD listserv, and those collaborators actually are still some of my closest collaborators, like 15 years later. And I agree with everything that's been said. And I would say I think of it not as I think of it as a way to identify people who can participate in your study, and I think that it's probably like half of the people who actually respond to you will end up signing on for the study, and then maybe half of those will actually get Irb approval and carry it out. So you still need to be intentional about your sampling and how you're specifically selecting your sites. And the authorship thing is a little different because you want to make sure that you're tracking things as you go, so you can really make sure that the people who are on the paper as an author actually met the criteria. But it's a great way to find people who are interested in collaborating and lead to many future studies.
Excellent. Well, I think that's time, so thank you all for joining us, and I hope this was a productive session and leads to a lot of future collaborations.